Hi, my name is Mike Oaksatz, and I've been studying this for a long time. And we're going to talk today about the relationship between childhood abandonment issues and how it can lead to something called empire consciousness, which is a way of viewing the world in a way that one needs to dominate, have power over, and hurt other people. And then how that empire consciousness results in further abandonment, and that cycle of abandonment and empire consciousness leads to the world that we have now, which is a world where there is war, poverty, and oppression. So that's what we're going to be talking about. And also we'll talk a little bit about how the intervention for that is oneness consciousness, which is an awareness that we are all connected, we are all one, and we need to take care of ourselves and each other. And it's a spiritual idea. It is an idea that is focused on love rather than fear, peace rather than war, acceptance rather than judgment, and how when we intervene with oneness consciousness, the world can then live together in peace and harmony. That's a tall order for a 15-20 minute talk, but we'll see where it goes. So I'm going to start off by talking about the following. First, I'm going to talk about what abandonment is, then what empire consciousness is and how it is a revenge that comes from abandonment, and then what empire consciousness can lead to, and then the need for intervention of oneness consciousness and how that can change things. So all of that is coming up. First, I'm going to share just a few words from one of my favorite books, Return to Love by Marianne Williamson. I think she sums it up pretty well in the very beginning, where she says, when we were born, we were programmed perfectly. We had a natural tendency to focus on love. Our imaginations were creative and flourishing, and we knew how to use them. We were connected to a world much richer than the one we connect to now, a world full of enchantment and a sense of the miraculous. So what happened? We reached a certain age and the enchantment was gone. Because we were taught to focus elsewhere, we were taught to think unnaturally. We were taught a very bad philosophy, a way of looking at the world, to think thoughts like competition, struggle, sickness, finite resources, limitation, guilt, bad, death, scarcity, and loss. We began to think these things, so we began to know them. We were taught that grades, being good enough, money, doing things the right way, and dominating others were more important than love. Love is what we're born with, fear is what we learned here. The spiritual journey is the relinquishment or unlearning of fear and the acceptance of love back into our hearts. So when we talk about abandonment, an abandonment is an early experience that many children go through where they are taught that they're unlovable and that they need to prove themselves, be a certain way in order to receive the love, affection, and attention of their parents. So the first kind of abandonment is parental abandonment or family abandonment. And that can be either physically, being ignored and left. It can be emotionally, being discounted and seen as less than and not worthy, or it can be neglect. It can also be any kind of abuse or trauma that the child has experienced. So I would say probably 70% of people have gone through some kind of childhood abandonment. The second kind of abandonment that is interesting is abandonment by the culture. The culture says boys are supposed to be like this, girls are supposed to be like that. If you don't fit in, there's something wrong with you. And who you really are, deep down, doesn't matter that much. So The kind of abandonment by the culture means that you have to conform to certain ideas that are cultural norms that don't necessarily fit with who you really are. So giving up one's authentic self to a world that does not accept you for who you are is a kind of abandonment. And the third kind of abandonment is self-abandonment, where you stop taking care of yourself, you stop knowing who you are, you start living the life that other people want you to live. These three kinds of abandonment result in a lot of internal pain and suffering. Now, if you're literally abandoned by your parents and you're 1 year old and they actually throw you out, the worst case scenario is that you would die. A child really wonders if they're not loved, picked up, held, talked to, if they're abandoned physically and emotionally. The child can actually wonder, am I going to survive or am I going to die? Am I going to be accepted and part of a family or am I going to be alone? The child doesn't verbalize this. The child doesn't necessarily think it on a rational level. But when children experience any kind of abandonment and or trauma, which is deep emotional or psychological or physical abuse, they are scared and their brains change due to that trauma. What comes out of that for children can be a revenge against those who hurt me. In other words, I am now going to have the power over others because I felt so powerless when I was small and I was unloved for who I was. Now, that revenge results in what's called empire consciousness. Empire consciousness is wanting to take over the world, control the world, tell people who they are, bully people when necessary, dominate, have power, have unlimited power to get your way, to do whatever you want. Now, empire consciousness on a personal level leads to empire consciousness on a cultural level, like cultural norms. So, for example, if we look at empires, like the Roman Empire and the Ottoman Empire and the British Empire and the American Empire, they're all about expanding, taking over other people's land and property and resources, and killing off whoever gets in the way of that process. We've had empires come and go. There have always been empires, and you wonder maybe there will always be empires. But this empire consciousness doesn't just evolve politically, it comes out of the inner psyche, the individuals who lead countries, the individuals who make laws and make decisions. Hitler is a perfect example of someone with empire consciousness who was a bully and decided to eradicate a whole group of people because he blamed them for the problems they had in Germany. So 6 million people were killed or more. Some of the qualities of empire consciousness are fear, the need to dominate or have power over, shame, hostility, judgment, arrogance, and the desire to objectify other people. In other words, they're not really people that we're killing. They're just in the way. They're just unimportant. They don't matter. So Native Americans don't matter. African Americans who are slaves don't matter, according to empire consciousness. So whenever there's power, control, domination, and hierarchy, there's always empire consciousness. It is a way of viewing the world that says some people have value and should get their way, and other people don't really matter. They just need to get out of the way. So if we look at the development of empire consciousness, you can see that it has evolved and evolved into violence, wars, destruction. Any kind of empire wants to take over something and recreate it and change it. So you have to get rid of whatever's there. The whole idea of bullying, dominating, having power over, it gives an immediate rush to a person. But it doesn't ultimately fix the inner wound that the person has. So therefore they have to keep doing it again and again, or doing it once would work otherwise. So bullying, which is part of empire consciousness, is a repeated behavior that goes on over and over again. And it usually involves degrading, dehumanizing, and shaming a group of people or several groups of people. So empire consciousness comes out of a desire to make up for or take revenge against the suffering that someone went through when they were very small. Now, a lot of people have written about that. One of the best authors about that is the Drama of the Gifted Child author, Alice Miller, who wrote about what children need and basically said that all children need to learn and grow, develop, live, and love. For their development, children need the respect, protection of adults who take them seriously, love them, and honestly help them become oriented in the world. When these vital needs are frustrated and children are instead abused for the sake of adults' needs by being exploited, beaten, punished, taken advantage of, manipulated, neglected, or deceived, without the intervention of any witness, their integrity will be largely impaired. And not only will their integrity be impaired, their brain will be impaired. The normal reactions to this should be anger and pain, but children in this hurtful kind of environment are forbidden to express their anger, and it would be unbearable to experience their pain all alone. They repress memory of the trauma, but these expressions come out in depression, anxiety, addictions, all kinds of psychic disorders, and suicide. So when a child has not had basic needs met and been loved, the kind of response that comes from that is acting out in some way. And empire consciousness comes out of that acting out. It comes out of a need to prove, to dominate, to be in control, to have power over, to somehow be better than everybody else. Now, this process can be seen in the way that racial relations exist in America today. For example, if we want to understand why a white cop with a gun would shoot an unarmed young black teenager, we have to understand slavery and how when people have been enslaved, black people in America, they had a lot of suffering and a lot of oppression. The people who did this to them have fear of their uprising and rebelling. Also, guilt about what was done. So in the current day, when a white cop sees a young black guy, there's historical, cross-generational mindset memories of what was done to a whole group of African American people, African people coming to America as slaves. And the fear of them rebelling is so great that the officer will take out the gun and shoot the black guy even though the black guy is unarmed. We have to understand this from a visceral level about suffering, pain, and oppression. So out of empire consciousness comes destruction centuries later. generations later. Unless it gets healed, it will continue to happen. And there will be memories in the cells, in our bodies, in our DNA of historical repression and oppression. Oppression against others, or if we have been oppressed, that suffering and pain will still be there. The solution to this issue is oneness consciousness, which has to be taught and has to be learned. And it has to help people move from the desire and need to dominate, control, oppress, hurt other people, to a desire to accept and support other people. It's very important that people move from a mentality of scarcity, there's not enough to go around, to abundance, where there is enough to share. Unless that understanding takes place, it's very hard to move into oneness consciousness. Oneness consciousness is the intervener, the intervention of the cycle between abandonment issues and empire consciousness, which empire consciousness leads to more abandonment issues. And until that cycle is interrupted with oneness consciousness, it is going to continue. What happens to people who are oppressed is very often they take out their frustration, their anger, their aggression on each other. So very often the people at the bottom of the hierarchy will be fighting amongst themselves. It's interesting how that works. If you can't express your voice and be heard, then you hurt, and that hurt ends up creating enough pain to take out anger and on others who are in your same situation. You would wonder why people would want to hurt people who are in their same situation. But there's a reason for that. So the whole idea of oppression trickling down, and then there's always within any group the possibility of oppressing someone else. Now, empire consciousness does not belong to any particular group. In other words, you can't say all white males have empire consciousness or all black females have empire consciousness. It's a very individual thing. So you can find empire consciousness in a group of middle school girls, for example, who are bullying some of their own peers and hurting them because they still have a hierarchy, a desire to get to the top, a feeling of worthlessness and shame, which comes from some level of either cultural abandonment, individual parental abandonment, or self-abandonment. The culture that we live in today, the American culture, does not value the whole person. And boys and girls are taught early on to be something, to get approval, to look for outside external validation. If they don't receive that, then they feel bad and they feel worthless. Oneness consciousness means from within you feel validated, loved, accepted, appreciated for who you really are. And that can be God connected or not, depending on the person's spiritual and religious beliefs. But in order to feel this oneness, one has to also feel whole, lovable, loved, and accepted. We live in cultures these days that encourage people to be competitive, judgmental, and critical of each other. And if you don't have the right stuff, there's something wrong with you, you will not be accepted. All this external idea of what it means to be valued and loved is part of empire consciousness. And it can affect children at a very, very early age and go on for their entire lives. So oneness consciousness is the solution. It's the idea of moving past the judgment and valuing of oneself through the eyes of others, and knowing that you are a child of love, a child of the universe, if you want to say it, a child of God, who is worthy and lovable. That oneness consciousness is what needs to be taught so it can live out in a culture creating more harmonious relationships of peace and understanding and listening and support for everyone. So that's the message today, moving from empire consciousness to oneness consciousness. Oneness consciousness being the only answer, the real answer to all the suffering that we have, all the abuse that we have, all the neglect that we have, all of the fear that we have. And I know it can happen. I've seen it happen, and I know people can grow and change into this level of oneness consciousness. I hope that you found this interesting. This is Mike Opsatz. My websites are angerresources1r.com and mirrormanfilms.org is one, and the other is mentorsmatter.us as another one. All of these websites have information on similar topics to this. Thank you.